During the Second World War, there were collections of executioners who followed the advancements of the German army, and they would conduct horrific slaughter en masse. It's believed that more than 2 million people were murdered and executed by the Einsatzgruppe and Einsatzkommando death squads. At the end of the Second World War, there were a number of the senior commanders of the executioners who were taken to the gallows within Landsberg prison for their crimes. They were responsible for systematic and mass slaughter, mostly by shooting, as victims were forced to dig their own graves on the edge of their homes and settlements. Still today there are many crimes of the Einsatzkommando which have not been discovered, and the victims still lie buried where they were shot. The Einsatzkommando were a subgroup of the larger Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads, but what did these men do, and why were they ordered to execute so many people? What might shock you is that the group was actually established even before the Second World War began, and the SS had planned to use execution squads even before the outbreak of the deadliest conflict in history, showing their true intent. Welcome to The Untold Past. Today we look at the executions of the Einsatzkommando, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The Einsatzkommando, or German Special Operation Units, were paramilitary groups that were established in 1938. It was the later Butcher of Prague and the chief of the SD and the SIPO, Reinhard Heydrich, who oversaw the group. It's not known to begin with what the Nazis intended to do with these men, but as the Second World War broke out, it was clear that they would become destructive executioners. The first and earliest collections of the death squad members during the war were forced into action for the invasion of Poland. These men were made up of men from the SD, Kripo and Gestapo, and may have been personally appointed by Heydrich himself and his subordinates, and they may have been considered the most ardent of Nazis. They were the men who would shoot and execute innocent people and civilians in line with the Nazi race laws and their policies on establishing new land for German people to settle in. The Einsatzkommando were the subgroups of the Einsatzgruppen, and these were individual killing squads. The Einsatzgruppen was a collective name for the different Einsatzkommando units, and there were roughly 3,000 men who were part of the group. Inside of the 3,000, up to 1,000 men were members of the SS and the Gestapo, the secret police, and they had been assigned a mission which was brutal and barbaric. They were sent to the front lines after the Wehrmacht and German army had conquered lands, and they were to exterminate Polish intellectuals and resistors, Jewish people, Romani people, communists and others who were rounded up inside of captured land. Inside of Poland, where the first Einsatzkommando units operated, they were involved in Operation Tannenberg, the slaughter of Polish people. During Tannenberg, which took place between September 1939 and January 1940, there were roughly 20,000 people who were executed in roughly 760 mass executions. The execution process was repeated hundreds of times. The Einsatzkommando units arrived in newly conquered land, and they then sorted civilians into those who were chosen for execution and those who would not. A few were sent to concentration and extermination centres, but most were shot within hours of the Einsatzkommando arriving. They were taken to the edge of settlements and towns on land which had been selected to become a death pit, and the victims were forced to dig their own graves, and they were usually led into the hole or the large grave in groups of 5 or 6. The Einsatzkommando executioners either stood on the edge of the pit with their rifles and weapons ready, and if this was the method of execution, then the executioners would unleash a salvo of shots at their victims, and they all shot at once. They also deployed a sole executioner within the pit, whose job was to order the victims to lay down, often on top of the bodies of the other victims who went before them. This executioner then gave a gunshot to the nape of the neck, a Genickschuss, a neck shot as it was known in German. In these ways, millions of people were slaughtered. The death squads inside of Poland also attacked Polish hospitals and patients inside of them. They were also involved in 1940 in AB Action, or the Extraordinary Operation of Pacification, the second part of the German terror in Poland, which aimed to exterminate the upper classes and further intellectuals. A lot of the killings were done as people began to disappear inside of towns and cities, and in this 7,000 intellectuals and leaders of the Second Polish Republic were killed, and 30,000 people were also arrested. Many were massacred and executed inside of forests, including at Palmyry. One former Einsatzkommando member, Felix Landau, stated of his experiences conducting executions that, at 6 a.m. in the morning, I was suddenly awoken from a deep sleep, Report for an execution, fine, so I'll just play executioner and then gravedigger, why not? Isn't it strange you love battle and then have to shoot defenceless people? 23 had to be shot, amongst them 2 above-mentioned women. They are unbelievable. They even refused to accept a glass of water from us. I was detailed as marksman and had to shoot away runaways. We drove 1 kilometre along the road out of the town and then turned right into a wood. There were only 6 of us at that point, and we had to find a suitable spot to shoot and bury them. After a few minutes we found a place. The death candidates assembled with shovels to dig their own graves. 2 of them were weeping. Slowly the hole gets bigger and bigger. 2 of them are crying continuously. I keep them digging longer and longer. They don't think so much when they're digging. Whilst they are working, they're in fact calmer. Valuables, watches and money are put into a pile. When all of them have been brought to stand next to one another on a stretch of open ground, the 2 women are lined up at one end of the grave ready to be shot first. 2 men had already been shot in the bushes by our criminal commissar. I did not see this, as I had to keep my eye on the others. As the women walked to the grave, they were completely composed. They turned round. 6 of us had to shoot them. The job was assigned thus: 3 at the heart, 3 at the head. I took the heart. The shots were fired and the brains whizzed through the air. 2 in the head was too much. They almost tear it off. Almost all of them fell to the ground without a sound. Only with 2 of them it didn't work. They screamed and whimpered for a long time. Revolvers were no use. The 2 of us who were shooting together had no failure. The penultimate group had to throw those who had already been shot into the mass grave and then line up and fall in themselves. The last 2 had to place themselves at the front edge of the grave so that they would fall in at just the right spot. Then a few bodies were rearranged with a pickaxe, and after that we began the grave digging work. The Nazis had outlined 61,000 Polish people to be targeted by the Einsatzkommandos, and they were also helped out by members of the Selbstschutz, groups of ethnic Germans. With the launching of Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, the Einsatzkommando officers were yet again deployed behind the Wehrmacht, and they conducted huge amounts of slaughter. Inside of Einsatzgruppe A were 340 men from the Waffen-SS, 89 Gestapo men, 35 SD officers, 133 from the Order Police, and 41 Kripo men, who were on the offensive rounding up people. They conducted operations inside of Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia and Leningrad. Einsatzgruppe B were attached to the Army Group Centre, and they got involved in using public hangings too to terrorise civilians and other people into submission. They operated across Belarus around the Minsk and Smolensk region. The C Group was said to have executed over 118,000 people and were active in Lviv and other cities close by. Einsatzgruppe D slaughtered over 91,000 people, and they conducted operations in Transylvania. Einsatzgruppe E was sent to Croatia, but within these were thousands of executioners and murderers who systematically killed many. One former member of the Einsatzkommando stated that, maybe you could call them volunteers, they were certainly given more vodka. They drank it and then everyone became braver. We would shoot them, give them up as lost, and that was it. Today all this is very difficult to explain. Whether to shoot or not to shoot, I do not know. The others did it because of their anger. This is a tragedy, a big tragedy. How shall I put it to you? How can I explain? It's a kind of curiosity. You just pull the trigger, he falls and that's it. They can accuse me if they want. I was given a 20-year sentence and served 20 years. Another witness who saw some of the slaughter claimed that, I remember a group of 4 or 5 girls who absolutely refused to undress. The Germans pulled on their clothing, undressed they shrieked, and they refused. They attacked the Germans, we could hear. The Germans cursed them and shot them there and then, fully dressed. They died with their clothes on. They were dragged to the ravine and thrown in. Others were docile, they didn't protest. I remember that evening the clothing piled up, coats, little souvenirs. It was all loaded into bins and hauled away. We could see the outline of bodies. At the end of the day, they built a circular sand. In its centre, we could see a black pool of blood and fat, a lake of black liquid. So many people had been killed, the wounded bled. You could see the blood through the sand. At the end of the Second World War, there were some commanders of the Einsatzgruppe, as well as officers who were taken to the Einsatzgruppe trial, and they were charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. There were a total of 14 death sentences ordered, but only 4 of these took place, with Otto Erlendorf, the commanding officer of Einsatzgruppe D, Erich Naumann, the commander of Einsatzgruppe B, Paul Blöbel, a commanding officer within Einsatzgruppe C, and Werner Brauner, a commander within Einsatzgruppe D, being taken to the gallows, and they were all executed on the same day in 1951. Still today there are many different people who became victims of the Einsatzkommando and death squads that are still buried under the earth, and the true extent of these crimes still remains undiscovered in some capacity. They were savage and brutal collections of men who were deployed to execute as many people as possible in line with the Nazi race laws. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.